Normally, when you nerf a Hearthstone card, you increase its mana or reduce its stats or text. However, sometimes the best solution is none of those things. In today's video, we're exploring cards that were nerfed in no way that was visibly apparent. The cards looked identical, but Hearthstone changed the rules behind them to bring their power level down. We've seen long ago that changing the rules can have dramatic effects on the game. Take, for example, Naga Sea Witch. They changed the rules back in 2017, making it so that Naga Sea Witch's reduction modifier would now be applied before other mana cost modifiers, making cards like Giants cost much less. You see, previously, when you had Naga Sea Witch in play, everything would cost 5, and the cards that said costs less in their card text would be ignored, leaving them at 5. With this rule change, suddenly those Giants only had to be reduced by 5 to now cost 0, as Naga Sea Witch is now effectively setting its starting mana to 5 instead of its current playable mana to 5. This immediately led to Naga Sea Witch Giant decks being its own archetype, and they immediately dominated the metagame by creating extremely powerful boards of Giants early in the game. Not only was it super powerful, but it also was extremely unfun and was in the game for a long time, and that led a lot of players to be very frustrated, to the point that there were like community Reddit ads being taken out just begging for the changes to be either reverted or for the card to be nerfed. So we know that there's high risk, not to just power level, but also to players' fun when you change the rules of how the game works. So while we're exploring these examples, we'll also be exploring whether or not it worked out well or was catastrophic, like Naga Sea Witch. We have 3 total cards in this video, and I think the last one is the best one, so be sure to stick around for that. So with all that said, let's move on to our first example. Wheel of Death. Wheel of Death is a legendary warlock spell from the Whiz Bang Workshop set that says, destroy your deck. In 5 turns, destroy the enemy hero. This is a card that you may think is just kind of like a meme deck, kind of just like a funny, hilarious card, but like isn't actually very good in like a competitive deck. But it turns out that on release, with the way the meta works, and with synergies with cards such as Drakari Enchanter, which, while technically were only usable with Wheel of Death in Wild, it does illustrate really well why this card was changed in the way that it was. You see, if we involve something like Drakari Enchanter, Wheel of Death would be played, and at the end of the turn would tick up its counter. So, in 5 turns, it would have 0, and then it would go to 1, and then it would go to 2, and then when it eventually hit 5, you'd win the game. With a card like Drakari Enchanter in play, at the end of your turn, it would actually tick up twice, because that's what it's doing. It's ticking up at the end of your turn. Practically in standard, because there wasn't Drakari Enchanter, what this meant was that you end your turn, it would tick up to 1, which means that on the 5th turn, you didn't actually have to survive that turn. You just end your turn and it would tick up to 5 and you'd win. So it was effectively, practically in reality, only 4 turns you actually had to survive before your opponent's hero would be destroyed. Turns out this card was actually very good and would win you games, and turned out to be its own deck archetype on its own, and was not the meme a lot of people thought it would be, which essentially means that this card is now like Mechathune that you can play on turn 8, but the death rattle goes off on like turn 13, and you just have to stay alive, which isn't necessarily the most fun gameplay when you're on the other end, because you can literally see your fate tick down and you feel helpless the closer and closer it gets to that mark. And normally, even if that's happening in a game where like you're just kind of losing, you don't always see it as visually, and so this obviously isn't like maybe the most fun thing for some people. So to nerf it, instead of making it cost 9, making it cost 10, they actually just changed the way the card works without changing any of the text visually apparent on the card. About a month and a half after the card came out, due to its popularity or power or both, they changed the triggered effect for the wheel's counter from end of turn to start of turn. So now not only does it not work with something like a Drakari Enchanter, which isn't necessarily the main reason, but now it doesn't tick up until the start of your turn. So you're actually, in sort of practice, having an extra turn added to this, because when you play it and end your turn, it doesn't tick down immediately one of the turns, which means that on the last tick, you don't just end your turn and win the game, you have to survive one more turn, and then your opponent ends their turn, and then you win the game. So it kind of leaves the opponent with the final say, by allowing it to tick later. So you're essentially, whether it be a full turn or half a turn, depending on how you view it, you now don't win the game as fast and you could die more often than you would otherwise. A super interesting change to a card to make it worse without actually changing anything about the card's appearance or its text or its stats or its cost. Pretty cool situation. Comparing it to Naga Sea Witch, I think we can see that this was not catastrophic at all. And actually, if we look at it how it's aged since this change, over the last year and a half, Wheel of Death has actually still been a very serviceable, even very good card and archetype in the standard format. Whether it be a year and a half ago or 3 months ago, people are still playing Wheel Warlock decks and having serviceable effects, winning the games with tons of armor from these new Starship packages, or using StarCraft control cards, whatever it may be. They have, for most of its life in standard now, been able to use this card well and this archetype well, and it has actually been top tier a couple of times since this nerf. So I guess if you really hate the card, you could argue it should have been nerfed harder, but I think that this nerf was actually really, really good because it's allowed the card to sit in a place where it's playable and enjoyable and not egregious, but not as strong as it once was. And I think ideally that's what you do in a nerf, is you bring a card down to a respectable level without necessarily killing it or removing it from the game. So I think a great change and a solidly wonderful fix to the card. Next up, we have a card that we've talked about a few times on this channel, but fits this video so incredibly well that it must be included. Snip Snap, a legendary neutral minion from the Boomsday Project set. Snip Snap says Magnetic, Echo, Death Rattle, summon 2 1/1 microbots, and it has 2 attack, 3 health, and is a mech beast. This card has a lot of cool things about it, such as it's the second card that was added to an expansion set after its initial release, and as a result actually had the shortest amount of time in standard of any card ever. But it's also the first card to use Echo outside of the Witchwood set, which is the set that released the Echo keyword. It also got a card nerfed before it even came out, which was Reckless Experimenter, which was a card which would have had a potentially very deadly synergy with this card, which would have allowed an extremely early game unlimited burst damage that we talked about in a previous video. If you don't know, the problematic use that actually did make it into the game was its synergy with Snip Snap Warlock. Snip Snap Warlock was a combo Warlock deck that used Snip Snap in various cost reduction effects such as Mech Warper and Summoning Portal, and it allowed you to play an infinite number of Snip Snaps. The way the deck works is you had a mech on your board, and if the mech lived, you would then play Summoning Portal, play Mech Warper, and then now your Snip Snap would cost 0. A Snip Snap that costs 0 may not seem like much to you until you realize it has Magnetic. Magnetic means that you can attach this minion to a mech that is in play, and so you're essentially buffing a minion in play by 2 attack and 3 health and adding that Death Rattle to it. In this case, all we cared about is that every time you play a 0 mana Snip Snap on a mech, you're giving it 2 attack. So what you do is you have that mech, you have the discounts, you just keep playing Snip Snap on that mech until it has as much attack as your opponent has health, and then you hit him in the face. It was that simple. Snip Snap Warlock was one of the only decks that consistently needed to factor the time it took to actually play all those cards, so you had to be on top of it. But anybody who had played it a couple times and had kind of figured that out was able to reliably deal enough damage to beat your opponent pretty much always. This was a time before Renathal. You couldn't use like scam things to get 100 armor like you can today, right? Like there was nothing you could really do about it. If they stuck a mech, you just died. So to fix this deck, what do? It's Snip Snap Warlock. If that's the deck name, you probably want to adjust Snip Snap itself because that's the card that you're using for infinite damage. Do you make it cost more? Sure, that requires them to have like another Mech Warper on the board or another cost reduction effect. That could be a way to do it. But then you nerf Snip Snap for all of its other uses, which are fine and fair and cool. Same applies for its text or its stats. If you nerf Snip Snap as a card, you nerf it in all the other ways. Not to mention, Snip Snap Warlock is a wild deck, and you don't nerf standard cards for wild decks. So changing Snip Snap in its appearance, in its card, and any of the ways the card is strong is out of the question. You could take this opportunity to ban Snip Snap and move right along, or you could find a more clever way to deal with this problem and any other potential future problems. And that's actually exactly what they decided to do. They felt like they wanted to keep the card as it was and nerf it in a different way. How they did that was that they nerfed the entire keyword on the card, Echo. We've said this many times, so I'll keep it brief, but they changed Echo from just saying repeatable the turn you play this to instead say repeatable the turn you play this, copies can't cost less than 1. And so now Snip Snap Warlock is dead because Snip Snap can never go below 0, and any Echo card also in the game where you would use repeatable infinite damage is also not usable, and any Echo card in the future is not infinitely repeatable either. So not only was this the best way to nerf Snip Snap in Snip Snap Warlock, but it was also a way to nerf any other potential future Echo stuff from happening if they decide to ever revisit that keyword. Compared to Naga Sea Witch, I think this one also is not at all catastrophic. Echo as a keyword is problematic when the reduction can get to 0 because you have an infinite amount of 0 mana cards in that scenario. Whether it be a Sound the Bells or a Snip Snap, anything that gives damage that is repeatable is a problem if it can cost 0. We also saw this with Light Speed, which is essentially an Echo card. They just don't give it the keyword because it's not a standard keyword at the moment. But as soon as that was introduced to Wild, we had the same problem again, where there was infinite damage on a card if you could get it to 0, and so they killed Radiant Elemental to not allow that to happen. This is something that's always going to be a really delicate situation when you have repeatable cards. If they can become 0, it's a real problem. So in terms of Echo, I think this was a great solution that worked out well by changing the rules.
One of the funniest things about making Hearthstone videos is you quickly learn that most viewers haven't played the game in many years. Some may even be hearing about Wheel of Death for the first time. While I appreciate that and hope you all continue to watch, it's also nice to have a game that you love to play. That's where this video's sponsor comes in. Aniba, a gaming marketplace with over 40,000 digital products. If you're anything like me, your first thought when you hear about a new gaming marketplace is that it's probably a scam. I'm no different, so I looked it up, and what I found was either people asking that question or people sharing their positive experiences. Aniba has an excellent Trustpilot score, secure transactions, and 24/7 live support to help resolve any concerns and ensure a comfortable shopping experience. Much like for any purchase in life, it's good practice to check multiple stores for the best price, and Aniba believes games are no different. So if you're someone who likes playing lots of different games or happens to be looking for a new game to play, then be sure to check out Aniba to make sure you're not overpaying for your next game. Whether you're a PC gamer like myself or prefer mobile or console, there are keys for you on Aniba. Just make sure to select the correct regions and platforms for you. Thanks so much to Aniba for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to the card that fits this video the best, our third and final card.
Last but not least is a card I'm most excited to talk about in this video because it is a clear example of just exactly what we're talking about, where you're taking a card, stripping some of its fun, sure, but also really stripping a lot of its power. Whether it be intuitive or not, you are making the card a lot worse, but nothing on the card has actually changed. Our last and final and special card is Yogg-Saron, Hope's End, a legendary neutral minion from the Whispers of the Old God set. One of Hearthstone's most iconic cards, Yogg-Saron himself, the OG. Battlecry, cast a random spell for each spell you've cast this game, targets chosen randomly. This card, much like last card, Snip Snap, has a lot of fun facts about it, has a lot of interesting trivia and notes. It is a very interesting card. Obviously, it has the crazy shenanigans that can happen of just casting a bunch of random spells all at once, but it also has some things that are kind of interesting based on where it is on the board, where it is in decks. It's got a lot of interesting parameters, and at some point, those have been changed. The way it works now and the way it works when it was printed is that when you play Yogg, it detects how many spells you had played that game, and then for that amount of them, it starts casting random spells and removing one from that counter of how many spells it has left to play, and then it just keeps casting random spells. However, one of the first funny, interesting things about Yogg is that the owner of Yogg-Saron on the board is actually the person who casts the spells. So if Yogg-Saron, for some reason, were to treachery itself or something and end up on your opponent's board, the spells would now be cast from your opponent's point of view, and so if it summons minions, it would summon them for your opponent. So basically, spells cast by Yogg-Saron are considered to have been cast by the controlling player. So you summon minions, wherever Yogg is on the board, that's who's getting the minions. If you cast something like Blizzard, whoever has the Yogg, Blizzard's hitting the other person's minions, which is really rare, but when it happens is quite something. This is a card that has gone through numerous iterations before it ever saw it in the game, and has just a crazy card, and one of the coolest cards in terms of like utilizing the digital version of the game, right? Like Hearthstone being a completely digital game, a lot of their cards are things that you couldn't do on paper, and Yogg-Saron is one of the best examples of that and how cool that can be. So when this card came out, many people expected it to be kind of what it has the reputation of now, which is just kind of a funny meme card you put in a spell deck or you put in a late game deck, and you just kind of put it out there and see what happens. But in its time in in Standard, it actually was so good that it completely took over and dominated Hearthstone esports tournaments, which at the time were kind of popular and had significance, certainly compared to today. And so having a tournament in a game that already doesn't get enough respect for how complex and difficult and like skill intensive it actually is, if you see games and tournaments being won by Yogg-Saron, any respect or skill you thought the game had, you're just gonna throw out the window. And you'd be fair to do that, right? You're watching a random slot machine decide who wins games. And so that wasn't ideal. They didn't like that. And back then, tournaments decided what got nerfed. Much more than anything else, it was nerfed for the top of play. You know, they wanted tournaments and the game to be fun. And so if Yogg-Saron's in a competitive, scenario, not the right card for that, right? Yogg is a card that is designed to be fit in the meme-filled, slop-filled, fun-filled games that people play where they don't necessarily care about winning or losing, they're just having a good time. If you're trying to play a serious competitive game where you really want to win, you put your best foot forward, you train a lot, you practice a lot, whatever it is, and that's how you win or lose, kind of not ideal, right? So to fix that, to nerf the card, they couldn't change its cost because 10 was the highest you could do. Changing its stats didn't really matter because half the time the card's gonna die anyway. It doesn't matter, right? You're just getting all the random spells. You don't care about the body so much. And if you change the text, you're just getting rid of a really fun card for everybody who wants to play it outside of tournaments. So you're not really able to do any of those things you would normally do for a nerf. So about 6 months after it came out, they changed the rules so that Yogg-Saron will now stop casting spells if it is destroyed, silenced, transformed, or returned to the hand. So if you play this card, you got 30 spells in your spell counter, and the first spell is Shadow Word Death and it hits your own Yogg-Saron, you suddenly are just done. Your turn's over. You have no more spells to be cast. Yogg's gone. Yogg casts no more. That happening, being able to happen, and probably happening more often than not, means that the card's competitive viability is completely gone, and unfortunately the value of it from a funds perspective probably is also, but it was something they had to do, and so they did it, and that was the best way that they thought a card could be nerfed. Thankfully for us Hearthstone players today, 4 years after that, in 2020, they changed Yogg-Saron again to no longer stop casting if it is destroyed, silenced, transformed, or returned to the hand. So for the last 5 years, if you're playing him in Wild or Twist or whatever, if he ever comes back, wherever he shows up in the game, you are now able to get the full array of random spells. But I think that is a perfect example of a card that was best nerfed by changing the rules. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, let me know what your favorite cards are, whether they were nerfed on the text or not. If you have any other examples that you think fit this video, let me know as well down in the comments below. Sometimes you don't just want to change a card by upping its mana, and I think it's super cool to see cards like this that were changed completely sort of invisibly, dare I say. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Check out this video here about cards that broke the rules in a different sort of way, where they kind of protruded the boundaries that Hearthstone normally has. I think it's pretty cool. I think you'll enjoy if you haven't already seen it.